Okay, you are listening to Mr. Gunn's Guides to Meta-Ethics, which you know is a fascinating A2 topic, traditionally seen as difficult, but I'm going to try to show you how it can be easy. And know that the notes that I provide here and the explanations I give are an attempt to be really concise and to get the basics in order for this tricky unit as we look to think about what we really mean when we use terms like right and wrong, or when we say that something is really good. So I hope you enjoy it and I hope it's useful to you. And as you may be able to tell, I've never used this program before. Firstly, it may be useful to think about different branches of ethics and also the different types of statements that people use and what branch they may be associated with. Descriptive ethics we normally consider to be objective statements. When someone is making a judgment, we call it normative or evaluative ethics. These are the ones that normally instruct us on how to behave, what we should and shouldn't do, answering the main questions of ethics. Meta-ethics specifically, we're looking beyond ethics. Meta is Greek for beyond, and we're looking for exactly what we really mean when we use certain terms. And it's a very precise and thereby quite challenging topic at A level. If we had a list of statements like the ones that are in front of you now, could you describe them as, could you group them as descriptive ethics, evaluative, judgmental ethics, or normative ethics, or meta-ethics? And I suppose the key is to be able to spot that ones like, what does it mean to say abortion is wrong? They're the ones that are really interesting to us. Or if we were to ask, actually, why is abortion wrong, and try to extract the reasons, rather than create a full-blown theory, that would be meta-ethics. And well done. Bonus points if you spotted that. And if we actually divide these statements up into groups, we can see we've got a collection of descriptions, descriptive ethics over here. Even I think abortion is wrong because it's a personal view. It's an accurate description of an individual's view, and therefore it's just descriptive ethics. It becomes evaluative ethics when we move it into a statement about the world, a statement that others might disagree with. It's therefore become a judgment. Abortion is wrong. And we can see the contrasting statement, abortion is every woman's right. We can see that they both are evaluative ethics, and these are the questions that are important to us. But information like what I'm presenting you with could form the basis of a contextual introduction, and so it's important to know the difference. Many ethical theories are naturalistic theories, and in fact most of the ones that we've been studying on our course so far are naturalistic. For example, natural moral law, because they believe that the moral will comes from God's divine command. They can be defined as natural because they've chosen a natural property of the world that they believe is, we can find goodness and wrongness within the world, just as the hedonists think that we can, with the goodness being anything that is pleasurable and the converse being everything that's wrong, so suffering or displeasure. Further, if we think about other philosophers that we've studied, or more naturalists that I know you guys have the information on, we can look at how they define goodness. For Aquinas, we'll have, Aquinas would of course say that what is natural is goodness. For Kant, we have duty, or the goodwill and motive. I can conceive of nothing that is good without qualification, besides the goodwill that shines forth like a precious jewel. For Bentham, we normally say pleasure, all forms of pleasure in the mind. For Mill, we would say happiness derived from intellectual pleasures. For Fletcher, we have agape. And because these philosophers have chosen to define goodness as a property, they're considered to be naturalists because they have found what they believe to be goodness as part of the natural world, and they justify the seeking of this by suggesting that it is a part of our nature to do so. G. Moore would have argued that naturalism must be a mistake. To try to provide a definition for goodness by referring to something that we ought to seek in the world as a natural property is a mistake. And he used the open question test to show why it is a mistake. He says if we take any supposed definition of good and we ask whether it's really a fully adequate, complete definition. I mean, think about it. If you ask somebody, is that a complete definition? Their answer should simply be, yes, it is a fully adequate, complete definition. But if their answer requires extensive qualification or mental gymnastics to justify why it is goodness, then G. Moore would say perhaps they're providing something that is actually, in fact, more than just goodness itself, or not sufficiently capable of meeting the criteria to qualify as goodness. The open question test really involves asking the philosopher a very simple question. That question is that really good? And unless they say unequivocally, yes, they must have failed. Naturalism must therefore be a mistake. We wonder then what would have happened if G. Moore could have asked each of these scholars whether their definition of good is really all that is goodness, whether it's a complete, sufficient definition. And they may struggle. And furthermore, others may be able to disagree with some of their views as to whether the ideas they put forward actually count as naturally, essentially, all that is goodness. For example, with Aquinas, he says that following God's natural order, because it is natural, is good. What about those that argue that, for example, homosexuality is good because it is natural? Would Aquinas have agreed with that? And we know that he wouldn't. What about something like cyanide, which is a natural ingredient of the world, or a tumour? When we think about Bentham, we can say, what about happiness derived from blood sports? Is that really good? What about if that makes a huge group of people happy? And it just shows really that G. Moore is not satisfied that their definitions are sufficient without further extensive qualification, and therefore they haven't actually extracted what really is the essence of goodness. In Principia Ethica 1903, G. Moore says, good is good, and that is the end of the matter. It's indefinable, it's a simple idea. Now, I want you to read through the information on this slide, but we've already looked at this together. So to try and provide other ways of thinking about it that I think are useful, you might think about it in terms of if you had a blind person and you wanted to explain to them what colours were like, you could try your best to explain to them that red is a vibrant colour, red is a warm colour, red makes us think of things like anger or love, or the passionate emotions, but it doesn't do anything at all to help a blind person see the colour. There's a YouTube channel by a blind person who talks about this experience. Equally, if we tell them that blue is a cold colour, they can't imagine it. And what we find is that there's a limit to our language to be able to describe things in the world around us. There's a limit to our ability to express to someone that hasn't experienced it themselves. Now, Moore argues that goodness is like colour. It's incredibly simple. And it's so simple that we can't break it down into constituent parts. We can only learn to identify it by experience. We can see red in our lives, be told that it's red, and in future become better at spotting the colour ourselves. The same for blue, and the same for goodness. If you imagine a blind person who had never seen an elephant before in their life, you could explain to them step by step, 4 legs, tusks, big ears, because it's a complex idea. He argues that goodness is too simple to be broken down, so we cannot learn to define it, and the scholars that attempt to define it therefore fail. And the key really is this idea down here. We cannot define goodness, but we can learn to recognize them. Again, emphasizing this idea of practice in moral philosophy. G. Moore, therefore, can be classified as an ethical non-naturalist. And that means that he thinks that moral terms, and that's not just goodness now, we'll extend it beyond, they cannot be defined at all within the world. However, we can practice, and using our intuition, which is like a gut feeling, we can learn to identify them, and we can intuit what is right and wrong. He might explain this by suggesting that, for example, if you've never seen a horrifically violent act, and one occurred in front of you, but you had never seen one before, you would still know that it's wrong. He argues your intuition may give you some signals that it's wrong, and that we can tell rights and wrongs from our intuition. Although Moore was actually a teleological intuitionist, as it states over here on the left-hand side, he did think that an action is right or wrong based on the outcome, but he believed that our intuition can be practiced to develop making choices that produce desirable outcomes. This is in contrast to a deontological intuitionist, who I believe W.D. Ross, I'm quite sure, is our example of that. Remember Henry Sidgwick? He was Peter Singer's favourite ethical philosopher of all time, said he was very complex and didn't write pop philosophy, but was incredibly accurate of what he said. And he went as far as to not say what moral goodness is. As an intuitionist as well, we cannot define moral goodness, but we can recognise it through some kind of intuition. Like, for example, these ideas here: prudence, justice, benevolence, all loving to everybody. Do we really need to explain why it is good to be all loving? Well, Sidgwick says that we can't. He says that the principles are self-evident, and a self-evident principle is one that stems from, that says foundationalism, and they require no justification at all. So a self-evidential principle is the basis of an argument in which a philosopher is saying, I do not need to continue this argument. It's clear within itself. Benevolence, because it is all loving, must be a good thing. And remember, you should always take the advice of Henry Sidgwick, because he was the original hipster with an original hipster beard. Pritchard contributes to the debate by doing several things. Now, I've having to make the choice here to not go through everything, but about Pritchard, we can contribute that he said that in general thinking, we use general reasoning, but in moral thinking, we tend to use immediate intuition, making him an intuitionist who argues that we can know some ethical dilemmas by following our immediate intuition. One of the best examples might be a mother's duty, what we might call a role-specific duty. And you can take the advice of H.A. Pritchard, because he has a Movember moustache. W.D. Ross has contributed a great deal. We remember W.D. Ross as contributing to deontology with this same argument. So this is double points for knowing that W.D. Ross's first glance, or first appearance prima facie or prima facie duties, are those duties that he suggests can be reordered according to certain situations. Like, for example, you might break your promise to save a life, or to not miss an opportunity to go to an extra philosophy lesson for self-improvement. What he's suggesting is that we can use our intuition from within a situation to reorder what's important, and in order to do that, we use our judgment, which is improved through experience, or improved a posteriori. W.D. Ross contributes to our course in terms of talking about deontology. Just like the very important deontologist, James Rachels, who has appeared a lot but will appear more in your Unit 4. And we remember these because of the relationship between Ross and Rachel, who love each other very much. Both deontologists. However, One is in Intuitionist, and the other one we're going to learn more about in Unit 4. This slide's one of the most handy in the resource, and it might be tricky to get your head around, but firstly it goes from top to bottom in columns rather than rows, and it explains the different positions for various ethical theories, some that we're studying in this unit and some that we've studied prior, but we've just covered it in class, and I think most of you have got what this really means. But if we start by looking at the ethical naturalists up in the top left, ethical naturalism is a branch of ethics that you're most familiar with, because if you look, all of the ethical theories we've studied are naturalistic theories. That means that naturalistic theories believe or work on the assumption that ethical statements make statements that can be proven to be true or false. Examples of this might be a utilitarian who says that in a situation the good thing to do is tell the truth, or the good thing to do is bomb Dresden, to pick an example that we actually looked at. Now for that utilitarian, that statement is a fact, just as a factual statement like Paris is the capital of France, or it is raining when it's raining, or the chairs in my classroom are blue. All of those are cognitive statements, and the naturalists think that ethical statements are cognitive as well. That means for them an ethical debate consists of some people that are saying things that are true and other people that are saying things that are false. And this is different to the contrast, which is the ethical non-cognitivist position held by the emotivist A.J. Freddie Jules Ayer and Stevenson, who suggest that ethical language is not like the other statements that I've used. They think that it makes no assertions about the world that could be proven to be true or false, and therefore the language is meaningless. So to put it into context, if somebody says abortion is right, or abortion is wrong, or abortion is bad, or abortion is good, they are meaningless statements in the sense of that they make no assertion about the world that should be considered knowledge. The statements are meaningless because they lack knowledge, and therefore you can imagine that an emotivist sees ethical debates as only useful as expressing whether you are for or against an issue. That's boo and hooray, which we're going to get to in a little while. The Intuitionists are very interesting group because they think this is Sidgwick, Pritchard and Ross and Moore, for example, is an intuitionist utilitarian. They think that it's indefinable, we can't speak of it, but it's knowable through intuition, and we can become better at finely tuning our intuition. So that means that they think that we won't be able to express or talk at length about exactly what we mean when we say ethical statements, but they are right or wrong. There is a correct ethical position knowable through your intuition. I love A.J. Ayer, let's be honest. I am quite sure that A.J. Ayer influenced James Bond, and there may be nothing in that, but I'll tell you why. Ladies' man, genius, arrogant, drinker, Nigella Lawson's stepfather, and when he was 25 or 26, he wrote Language, Truth and Logic in 1936, first edition, and he felt like he'd finished philosophy. This is in his work as part of the Vienna Circle with the logical positivists in the 1930s, led by Maurice Schlick. You remember Schlick because he was unfortunate as his student killed him. Anyway, he used our favourite thing to make this the position on ethical debate for emotivists really clear. And our favourite thing, we all know, is Hume's fork. And I'm not going to add all the labels, but we've been practicing for ages, haven't we, all the labels, and we know that there are two types of statement according to Hume, which are analytic statements or synthetic statements. And there are examples of analytic statements. They're all mathematics, all logical statements, all verifiable through reason alone, all through a simple analysis of the items contained within the statement. An analytic statement. Sorry, my son's shouting, distracting me, shouting Adam up the stairs, which is quite disrespectful. Anyway, an analytic statement is referred to by Hume as a relation of ideas, and that's an even more sophisticated way of referring to analytic statements. The synthetic statements we call matters of fact, and they're verifiable, which means checkable. You can go and check them to be true or false. For example, gravity, but it's raining, I like this, I don't like that. They are synthetic and verifiable through sensory experience. And then we have the ethical language down the bottom, meaningless, cannot be verified and therefore are completely meaningless statements. AJA actually had quite a strict view on what could be verified. And this group here we haven't really discussed at length yet, but we will get to it. There are more statements in the meaningless statement. If it can't be verified through synthetic means right now, or analytic means right now in the present day, then it may be meaningless. So this bracket for AJA actually included historical statements about Caesar, for example, where we have a lot of evidence but can't necessarily go and verify it right now. They have weak verification, so they're kind of between these two extremes here. More on that perhaps in lesson. We're quite well practiced now at putting these statements into the correct category, whether they're analytic, synthetic, and verifiable or meaningless. Analytic ones first. We know that in order to qualify as a bachelor, you must be unmarried, and therefore we only have to look at these two terms within to decide that that's an analytic statement. We normally add that bachelors are unmarried men, and then we've got complete definition, but it's still analytic. A relation of ideas. Look at me relating these ideas. That's all I need to know to decide that it's an analytic statement. Bachelors are happy. Well, in order to find out whether that's true, we would have to go and check, and that makes it a synthetic statement. Most cats like fish, again the same. All cats like fish, again the same. God answers prayers, oh dear, debatable. As we look into religious language, different perspectives will answer that in different ways. Euthanasia is wrong. Meaningless, because we've got an attempt at normative ethics, and as AJA thinks that these statements are non-cognitive, that means they can't be proven true or false and therefore are meaningless. And in fact, we may say the same about this one. If we were given Aya's perspective, by the way, it would of course be meaningless, because just as he doesn't like the word good, he also doesn't like God. Well, not personally doesn't like God, but he doesn't like the terminology because it's not precise, it doesn't refer to an object of the world, and therefore is not verifiable. This again, checkable, the abortion one, and here, meaningless. Here we have a breakdown of one simple sentence. Abortion is wrong, and it's not an analytic statement because the abortion doesn't mean the same thing as wrong, or abortion can't be broken down into one part that is wrong and another part that is something else, so it's not a relation of ideas. There's no way of testing that abortion is wrong. We can produce different tests that do tell us things like at what stage a fetus will feel pain, at what stage a fetus can have a preference or an interest. And for Aya, those sorts of statements might be meaningful in a debate. If we said, for example, at 6 weeks a fetus can start to feel pain, or at 20 weeks a fetus can express an interest, can start to form desires, or think, or have basic consciousness, then we could use those in a debate because they're testable medically. But when we have abortion is wrong, we've got this ethical term, and therefore it's meaningless, and it doesn't actually tell us anything. It leaves us wondering. We don't have any knowledge at all about abortion from that statement. All we get is the certainty that the person saying the statement doesn't like it. So there's this one tiny bit of use. This is the use up here where it says boo. Okay, Stevenson is also an emotivist, and he contributes later in 45. This is about the time that Ayer had just written his reply to some of the critics and published the newer Language, Truth and Logic in 46, where he states a lot of his similar arguments. So Stevenson would have had about 10 years to understand and work around the same sorts of points that Ayer said. And he thinks there's a couple of things that Ayer's just missing out a little bit, which is that it's important to recognise that we don't just get whether someone is for or against an issue. We should also appreciate that if they are for or against an issue, they have based their argument on beliefs. And that tells us more about the person, so there's a bit more meaning to the statement than Ayer would give it. We are further towards the slight bit of meanings on the scale from meaning to meaningful to meaningless. And another element that other philosophers accentuate more than Stevenson is that it's persuasive. Let's face it, if you are saying to someone, look, that is wrong, lying is wrong, stealing is wrong, cheating is wrong, you're normally trying just to have a little bit of influence when it comes to their behaviour in the future, and that is a form of meaning or a form of use for Stevenson. I want you to imagine that you're in a room and there's someone working in the next room and you hear this. Ah! That's all you hear. Ah! But the question is, what have you learnt? Well, they haven't made an assertion with that noise. You haven't learnt a great deal. You might have learnt that someone is in distress, but you couldn't guarantee it, and you certainly couldn't guarantee that this is what caused it. It could be a number of things. However, if they said, I have hurt my thumb, I just hammered a nail straight through my thumb, then we get cognitive statements which tells us about the world, makes assertions, and gives information about the speaker, and therefore is a more meaningful. In terms of your essay, when we look at a slightly more complex diagram like this that shows us a range of views, I keep telling you that metaethics is a tightly knit ball that you have to unravel, and as you're unravelling it, that's like explaining perspectives that are closer together before. We used to work in binaries. Are you consequentialist or deontologist? Well, your A2 philosophy course is more complex than that, and as a result, we would rather that you can explain your way around a map that looks something like this in your essay. Now, it might sound complex, but when you're constructing an essay, it should start to feel the way that I'm describing it here. Because if we look at a statement like abortion is wrong, we can see that there's a cognitive way of interpreting that statement. It's this direction. There's already a red arrow there, but anyway, I'll work in blue. And people that would subscribe to the idea that abortion is wrong as a cognitive true or false statement are the naturalists, utilitarian, natural moral law, Kantism, or into non-naturalism, such as the Intuitionists. That's what that says. However, we also have the non-cognitive view over here, which is that if you say abortion is wrong, it doesn't make an assertion, certainly is not knowledge, but it does express feelings, boo, which, according to Stevenson, can recommend or try to persuade others, and these are the emotivist perspectives down here. There we go, just a quick clarification that for Ayer it really is people primarily expressing emotions. Remember I told you it's such a harsh view on what counts as knowledge that so he would even exclude Henry VIII had this many wives or whatever, and I don't want to get into that because there's all these disagreements about whether or not annulments count as marriages. He may have only had one wife. Or can you believe it? I've got into it. Well, my point is he has very harsh views on what would count because of his verification principle. Stevenson gives a little bit more to a little bit more to ethical statements because they're based on beliefs and they have a persuasive element. And he's a more recent contributor, not quite a modern contributor though. It's important to know that Ayer didn't call his theory Boo Hurrah theory. That's other people that called it Boo Hurrah, but it's become quite well known as that because it kind of reduces ethical debates to suggest that really when people are debating, they're not expressing differences in knowledge as such when they state their view on an ethical issue, unless they're using factual information. They're rather saying whether they are happy about it or not happy about it. On this slide we have a nice roundup of most of the ideas that I've tried to cover, but really it's this top idea that I'm trying to drill home. It's all about you knowing what philosophers you would place on this scale. For example, we'd have Ayer all the way over here, Stevenson a little bit nearer to the meaningful side, and then perhaps more somewhere like here, right up at the meaningful end, we'd have Bentham. But could you explain to me the reasons for their positions? If you could, you're doing well and you're learning, and I'm very impressed. But the idea is that in your essay you're trying to explain how useful they find language. On the next slide we're going to talk about someone that I would put about here, and that is R.M. Hare, who's got no hair. Okay, see? Let's not forget this. Let's make this link. It will make it easier for us. And he extends on what Stevenson says. The only thing is he takes it into his own theory called prescriptivism, which annoyingly in the song we listen to on YouTube is called prescriptionism, and that's not what the theory is. And it's Richard Hare's view that really strongly when you're making ethical statements, you're using emotive language to influence feelings and attitudes. When you say to someone, I disapprove of abortion, it's like linguistic universalizability. You are implying that others would take or should take the same course of action that you would given the choice. And again, there's some logic to that, but it just makes it that bit more meaningful. So on the scale, we've got Ayer, that ethical language is meaningless, but gives us a use of expressing just boo or hooray. Stevenson slightly more, it's often based on a belief. And then Hare argues that, like it or not, we're always trying to express a universal quality, and we are trying to prescribe actions to others. We're trying to influence their decisions, recommend a universal way of living. You could turn this into a contributing paragraph quite easily, or evaluative in AO2. Alright, we're going to end with a bit of extension work. A really worthwhile activity if you want to help embed this knowledge and get using it quickly. Explain AO1, the difference between metaethics and normative ethics, and I want you to focus on what metaethics is, and particularly G.E. Moore and the work that we have done on S.A. Burns with 36 different definitions of good, only one being problematic, 17A of moral excellence upright, and then Part 2, evaluate, that's an AO2 style question. These aren't exactly in your assessment style, but they're good practice as you look at the strengths and weaknesses. Be critical, use a wide range of scholars. There's so many in this topic, all contributing smaller parts. This mimics what you'll be doing at university much, much, much more closely. And I hope if you've sat through that's been helpful, and I'm looking for feedback because this is my first one. Okay, and good luck with your work. See me if you have any problems.